Let me go ahead and turn on mic. God, thank you for allowing us to gather. God, I pray that you would speak and that we would hear. Help us to know about your love and what our response should be. Amen. Okay, so as Ben said, next week we're doing a bunch of sharing time in church, and so today, instead of a usual expositional sermon, I'm going to do sort of an extended version of what you get to do next week. So one thing that's happened in our lives over the last year is we got introduced to a special guest. So about 1 year ago, how to get there? There it is. Okay, so about 1 year ago, this little puppy came into our house. And this little puppy has lived with us for the last year. He's gone everywhere with us. This is a picture of him in our van. He rode in that van from the state of Maine to the state of California. So that little dog traveled with us for about 2,000 miles just on those two trips, let alone all the other trips here and there and everywhere else. And over the past year, he's gotten a lot bigger. So he went from itty-bitty puppy to a full-size dog. One of the reasons he's not coming up here with me so I can demonstrate this, and I had to use pictures, is last weekend he went home. So this is a picture of last weekend when he went home. You see, he was never our dog. He's owned by Southeastern Guide Dogs. And we just got the privilege of taking care of him for a year. He was never ours, and we knew that from the start. And as part of that, we had to follow all of the rules and procedures and guidelines that they established. So twice a month, we would have to go somewhere in the state and meet with other puppy raisers and guide dog raisers to make sure that our training schedule is correct. Sorry, I can't even look that direction. We had to make sure our training schedule was done right. We also were given a book that thick to know how to do every little thing with that dog. And throughout the year, it just reminded me of what this thing called stewardship was. You see, we live in a life of stewardship where our life is not our own, and we've been given a great book as to how we're supposed to live it. We've been told to meet with other people, to remind ourselves that we're living this right, to remind ourselves of whose we are. And so that's led me throughout this last year to be constantly reflecting on this concept of stewardship and what is stewardship. And so this morning, I'm going to spend some time telling you about some of the things that I've learned throughout this year about stewardship, how it's changed who I am, how it's changed some of the things that I think of. And a lot of it's just reminding me of some things that I've always known. It's just keeping it on the forefront of my mind. And so as we go through, there's some notes on the back of your bulletin about stewardship. And so let's jump into some of those things. So the first thing that we need to do is define what is stewardship. So on your notes, there's the nice little fill in the blanks. So we're going to fill in all those blanks throughout the day. So stewardship is living with the correct priorities and perspectives. So for one thing, you might notice, okay, where's the money thing? So you got the Friday bulletin, and it was said I was going to be talking on stewardship. And the question is, where's the money thing in this? We will mention money at some point later on. But that is so small of a part of what stewardship actually is. Stewardship is not about what you just giving money to the church. That's like teeny tiny. It's about a way of living. It's about how we do everything that we do. So it's living with the priorities and perspectives of the owner. The owner is God. God is absolutely the one who owns everything. In Psalm 24, it says, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers." God owns everything that we could possibly imagine. They're all his. We're his. We don't own a thing. That's the perspective we need to live our lives with. Another perspective that I've had to learn a lot is that God can accomplish whatever he wants to do. He can do it with us, or he could do without us. He does not need us. But for some strange reason, he chooses to work through his people most of the time. He could have sent the Messiah to redeem us, but he didn't do it just all at once. He actually chose Abraham. It was like this whole world, and then all of a sudden he focused in on one person, Abraham. And he decided to work through the line of Abraham. He didn't have to. He chose to do it. He also has decided that he's not going to just cause people to come to Christ. It's going to be through relationships. It's going to be through having people in your homes. It's going to be through getting to know one another that people come to him. Yes, God can give them a vision and just call them and grab them and bring them in, but that's not how he chooses to do it most of the time. Most of the time he chooses to work through us. And so we have to keep that in mind as we live our lives. So along these things, there's three things in my life that I have to deal with on a constant basis of what the focus should not be, and then we're going to get to one thing that is the priority that we need focus on. So the first thing is efficiency is not the priority. For me, this is huge. I'm a mathematician. That's a big part of my job as I teach math at the university. We're all about efficiency. We like to boil it all down into the least amount that you could possibly get to where you want to go. So I'm efficient by training, but also that's just part of who I am. I like to do things with the least amount of work possible. I like to be efficient. I like to get stuff done. And I think something that I've been learning over the last several years, and we talk about this in Sunday school quite often, Phil Bishop mentions this frequently, is God is not efficient. God's not about efficiency. When he decided to call a people, he went through Abraham, he went through Isaac, he went through Jacob. These are people that it was not an efficient process. It wasn't, let's just call this person 5 years later, okay, we got the next one. No, there was like hundreds of years of just these guys. But then he also, when he called his people out of Egypt, it wasn't about efficiency. He let them wander for 40 years, just wandering around in the desert, doing who knows what, just learning and growing. It wasn't about efficiency. One thing that's always shocked me is once they got into the land, we instantly think, everything's great, we're set. No, he let them live in the land for 400 years before he even had the first king. Talk about inefficient. We think, this king is sort of where we're going. We're going to learn about the king just so that we can set up the Messiah. No, he let them do the book of Judges for 400 years. We think our country's been around a long time. The nation of Israel was around for 400 years before they even basically had a constitution, before they had a monarchy, before they had a king. God is not about efficiency. Even when he founded the church, he did not do it with the most eloquent people possible. He did not come into the world of Rome and say, okay, I'm going to win over Caesar so that Caesar can dictate to the rest of the world, you need to find God and you need to follow him. No, he went to a bunch of fishermen, tax collectors, and just plain ordinary people. And he decided to use 11 ordinary people to start the church. And not only did he do it with ordinary people, he did it with like no budget. He didn't give them like millions of dollars. He just gave them, oh, well, you're a fisherman. I guess you'll be able to support yourself somehow. And he had Paul, who was a rabbi, but he could also be a tent maker, and so he would go and work as he ministered to people. It wasn't like he did this with tons of money. The other thing that just shocks me as I've been reflecting on the efficiency is God created the world who knows how long ago. Why did it take thousands of years from Abraham to Christ? This is not time efficiency. This is not an efficient process. God is not about efficiency. Instead, he uses fallible people to do things over time. With this perspective, one of the things that I've been dealing with over the last few months especially is my concept of time. In about a month, my family's going to go to Guatemala to visit one of our other missionaries. And as I've been studying and reading about Guatemala and the culture there, I've learned they have a very different perspective of what time is. Yeah, to say the least. But the issue is their view of time wrong? Is our view of time the only way to view time? Our view of time is all about looking towards an end goal. And what do we need to do to achieve that end goal? Which means we've got a limited amount of time. By having that limited amount of time, we equate time with money. That is purely a Northern European American concept, that time is money. That is not biblical. Now, of course, we can get some biblical principles to back that up, and there's some point in that we need to use our time well. But this is just something that's just gripped me that I'm struggling with, is that, okay, do I use my time well? Well, what does that mean? That's a really, really hard thing to get my head around. Okay, so the first thing is that efficiency is not the priority. How I use my time the best possible way, that's not the priority. The other one that I deal with is thrift is not the priority. How much we put a value on something has to do with how much of that something is there. If you've got a lot of something, you don't have much value. Over the last couple of years, I was out counting birds and fish and stuff like that with my son. And we were talking about the different birds and how, well, we consider a lot of these birds to just be common. Well, when you go to another part of the world, they think those are exotic birds because they don't have those kind of birds. So now those birds have value, where if you have a lot of them, the value of that thing goes down really quickly. So that got me to thinking, well, God owns everything, and God can create anything. What is the one thing that is limited in God's perspective? He had one son. One. And what did he do with his son? He sent him to us. The only thing that is limited to God is himself. That's the only thing he only has one of is himself. And he chooses to give him to us, to call us to him. Everything else is totally unlimited to him, which means money, he's got as much of that as he wants. He's got as much of everything else that he wants. And his view of money is not about thrift. His view of money is not about let's try to save it, let's try to use the least amount possible. His view of money is, I've got as much as I want, let's be abundant with it. Let's use it to glorify God in whatever way possible. In Matthew 26, there's a story just shortly before Jesus died. One of the Marys came before him and broke a very expensive bottle of perfume on Jesus' feet and washed his feet with the perfume and with her tears. And Judas was being thrifty, just like we often are. He says, couldn't we have used that to help the poor? And Jesus said, no. You need to not think of it as this limited resource. I am the one to be worshiped. Spend money worshiping me. That is a good use of the money. And another thing that's happened in the last couple months is a few weeks ago, Tim Tomasian spoke on 1 Timothy chapter 6 on abundance. We had a wonderful discussion in our shepherding group that week that really ripped at the heart of several of us. That abundance, we think of that as money. But in that week in group, we had some wonderful spiritual insight. It's how do you put attention? How do we be abundant with our time with other people? That sometimes it's stopping and focusing on people and giving them our full attention is where we can be the most abundant. And so the whole idea is, how do we use our money? We use it to glorify God. We use it to bring him the glory that he is due. The last thing that's not the priority is comfort. I am all about comfort. I like comfortable situations. If you ask my family, I like a routine. I really like a routine. I like to do the same thing every day at the same time. That's just who I am. I like being comfortable. But a few weeks ago during an elder meeting, we brought out the verse of Proverbs 14:4 and talks about if you have no oxen, you have a clean cradle or a clean manger or a clean storehouse. But it's with oxen that comes the harvest. If you're comfortable, you can keep things nice and clean, structured, and everything in order. But when you do that, you miss out on what God's trying to do in your life. An example in our lives that this really turned up was during the week between Palm Sunday and Easter. In our household, that is like Christmas time. We fill it with so many activities because we consider that the holiest time of the year. And when we do something, we do it with parties and people. Over a course of 4 days during the latter half of that week, we probably had at least 50 people in our house through various parties and activities. Going into it, I was like, there is no way we should be doing this. We need to cut out half of these because I am not going to be comfortable. This is not what I want. This is chaos. This is just craziness. But when the weekend was done and the last of the crowd had left on Easter Sunday night, I reflected back on it and went, yeah, it was not comfortable. Yes, it was extremely hard. Yes, I'm tired and exhausted. But to see different people that came into our lives and came into our home that weekend, to hear some of the conversations and how God ministered to them, it was like, okay, this is why we're supposed to be doing what we need to be doing. That this world is not about my comfort. It's not about making me happy. It's about loving people. And that's where the last thing of what is the priority. And yes, it is one priority. When I wrote that, I was like, okay, this grammar's not right. And I went, yes, it is correct. Because loving God and loving people is the priority. It's one priority because you cannot do one without the other. The only way that you can love God is if you love the people that he loves. The only way that you can love people is if you have the love of the Father inside of you. This is what our ultimate priority is. This is what we need to be focused on in everything we do. We need to not be focused on trying to do things the most efficient way possible. We need to not be going, okay, where can I get that thing done? And I fall into that so easily, especially here at church, is I'm often focused on getting things done. I've gotten myself into doing so many things around this place that sometimes I'm running around Sunday morning, running from one thing to another, and I just pass by someone that needs me to just stop and talk. That is what our priority should be, is focusing on the people that we are around. Not getting so focused on getting tasks accomplished, but instead focus on the people that we are there to actually love and be loving with. In Luke 10, 25 and 28, it talks about you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. That's what Jesus said. The whole law and the prophets is summarized in this. Everything that he cares about is summarized in that. Love God, love people. And it's how we respond to that we're going to be judged at the end. In Matthew 25, 31 through 46, Jesus gives the parable of the sheep and the goats. And he really gets into, when you come before me at the end of time, it's not going to be, did you have the right theology? Did you get the right things accomplished? Did you check the boxes? Did you raise your children well? Did you be successful at work? Were you able to build a big church? Were you able to do that? It's, did you love me when I came in front of you as someone that was poor, in jail, helpless, hopeless? Did you love me then? Did you see that I was there? Did you love the people that I love? That is what he cares about. And what I'd like to do is give us some applications of this. And towards the bottom of your little thing, there's a little table at the back of the bulletin. I'm going to go through 5 things. These are 5 big areas in which we can either treat it as an idol or as a tool. Is this something that we're worshiping or using to worship ourselves, or is it a tool that we use to bring God glory and to worship God and to love God and love people? So the first thing is something that we've talked about a lot, time. Do you use time as an idol or do you use it as a tool? Is your primary focus on getting things done, or is your primary focus on loving the people that you are around? There are many times where I trample over people in order to get the job done. And that is not what we want to do. At that point, I've worshiped time as an idol. I've put it in the wrong place. It has the wrong position of, my time is more valuable than you are. Me accomplishing these results are more important than taking the time and hearing your pain, or living life with others, that it just takes time and it's hard. Okay, the next one, money. Yeah, we had to, stewardship, you got to at least mention money. How are you using your money? Do you even know where you're spending your money? Or is it just floating in and floating out? How can I use money to love God and love people? Do I just use it to take care of the things that I want, the priorities that I have? Am I so focused on money and the success and things like that that I'm ignoring the real goal of using the resources God gives me to bring him glory and to point others toward him? The next one goes along with it, of stuff. Stuff, home, cars, even lawnmowers. How many things do I need? How do I use them? How much of this thing do we put into stuff when we could just borrow it from our neighbors or come together with other people? How often would I use a chainsaw? Never, personally, because I don't know how to use one. I don't really want to. So if I need something done, I call up a friend. Can we call up other people? Can we share stuff? Do we think of this as my car? This last weekend when we went on our trip, we got to the school to start a field trip, and we realized we were one seat short. But one of the other parents had a car that was bigger than my car that I was going to take. And she said, would you be willing to swap cars for the weekend? This is a family and people, we just met just then, and she said, can you drive my car so that we can get these kids to this field trip? That is talking about this stuff is not mine, this stuff is to be used. It's not about keeping it safe, it's not about keeping it good, it's using it. Do we use our home as just a place for us to have refuge, or do we use it as a place to minister to others? Do we open our homes with the lack of comfort that is, and even open our homes when they're dirty to allow people to be cared for? Or do we have to spend 3 days cleaning our home before we invite anyone over? Or you just don't clean, yeah. But are we willing to use the things that God gives us to bring him glory and to love him and to love others? How are we using those things? The next one's a tough one. Family. Yes, family can be used as a tool to bring God glory. It can also become an idol very, very easily. Does my role as a parent, a spouse, a child define who I am? When I think of myself, do I think, hey, I'm this person's father or I'm this person's son? Is that where I get my self-worth, that I'm a good parent or I'm a good child taking care of my aging parents? Where do I find my self-worth? Is it from that, or is it that I'm a child of the King? That's where we need to be finding our worth. Another thing that's hard for our family is our level of commitment to our own household's activities limiting our ability to practice hospitality towards others. Sometimes we're a busy family because we got lots of teenagers, which are going every different direction. And those are really, really good activities, but constantly we have to be thinking, do we need to be doing this, or does God have something else? Or are we so busy that when a need comes up, we can't meet it because we've already overcommitted? So is our main focus on our family, or is it elsewhere? Or is it focusing on loving God and loving people? The last one is a vocation or work. What do you do during your regular day? It could be a stay-at-home mom taking care of kids. It could be an adult that's taking care of aging parents. It could be that you actually go someplace and get paid to go there. It's what you do on a normal thing. Do you use your vocation for your own benefit, or do you use it to bless and serve others? When you go to work, are you thinking, I've got to go check the clock, get my work done, get my paycheck, and move on? Or are you going to work and saying, God, how can I love you and love others in what I'm going to do today? Please open my eyes to see what happens. Phil Bishop's done a great job of encouraging faculty members like myself to do this in our work. And as I've gone the last few weeks, as I've tried to keep that in front of my mind, there are some times where I get a student that comes into my office and they just need someone to talk to. And I spend an hour and a half listening to them talk about everything. That seems to have nothing to do with my job, but at the end of the day, I go back and say, okay, God, that's what you wanted me to do today. I was able to use my work to love God and love people. It's not, thankfully, I'm in a business where I've got really flexible time. There's a lot of demands on my time, but it's very flexible demands. And so I can more easily do that. But even if you have something that's very rigid, there's always times to smile at people when you say hello. There's the ability to just care for one another in everything that you do. We need to go about our every day and say, what is the important thing? We need to remind ourselves daily. We need to love God and love others. And we need to use everything that God provides to us to worship Him, to love Him, and to use it to love the people that He loves, those people that He just sent His only precious Son to allow them to have a relationship with Him. God, help us as we go through life to have the right priorities. That You are the one that we should be loving. That we need to love others. We need to love You. God, I pray that You would just change our minds, change our hearts, change our busyness so that we can have the right priorities and the right perspectives that You have given to us. We pray this in Your name. Amen.